There's something happening in silence. Something most people can't name, yet everyone feels. In every office meeting, every social circle, every romantic relationship, a few individuals move differently. They never rush, never fill the air with noise, never justify themselves. While others are busy explaining, these few are calculating. Their stillness is not weakness. It's control disguised as calm. You won't find them fighting for attention or approval. They don't need validation, because their power doesn't come from words. It radiates through subtler channels: posture, gaze, rhythm, tension. When they enter a room, conversations shift almost imperceptibly. Eyes turn toward them without knowing why. Even silence bends around their gravity. Most people miss it because they're trained to listen to words, not to presence. They think communication happens through sentences and opinions, but Machiavelli would smirk and say, the real dialogue happens before anyone speaks. The body always confesses first. A glance that lingers too long, a chin slightly tilted upward, a microsecond of hesitation before answering. Each fragment reveals hierarchy, fear, and desire. Social predators read this code fluently. They hunt not through aggression, but through perception. They can sense uncertainty the way a shark smells blood. This is not the loud dominance of bullies. It's the refined power of observers who command through understanding. They appear patient, detached, almost serene. But beneath that calm lies strategic awareness. Every move you make tells them who you are, what you want, and where you can be controlled. They read insecurity as invitation, empathy as entry point, politeness as weakness. And the frightening part is you don't even know you're being read. You think you're communicating on the surface, but they're studying the undercurrents, the body language patterns that reveal your entire psychology. Machiavelli had already seen this long before modern psychology gave it names. In The Prince, he described power not as something loud or theatrical, but as something that lives in the subtleties, in the pauses, the calculated glances, the unspoken cues that determine who leads and who follows. To Machiavelli, domination was never about volume, it was about perception. The ruler who truly understands human nature doesn't need to threaten or persuade. He simply knows how to read the invisible, the trembling of a hand, the hesitation in an eye, the posture that betrays uncertainty. Every court, every meeting, every social hierarchy runs on this silent grammar of power. The modern social predator is not a new invention. He is the psychological heir of the Machiavellian archetype, the quiet strategist who governs not by decree, but by understanding. In today's world, words have multiplied, but meaning has evaporated. Everyone performs confidence, few possess it. Everyone mimics empathy, few feel it. This is the perfect ecosystem for the Machiavellian mind. While others drown in noise, the predator listens beneath the words. He notices what the body says when the mouth lies. He doesn't chase attention, he studies its movement. He doesn't seek control. He lets others surrender it through their unconscious signals. For him, every conversation is a chess match of gestures. Every nod, every lean, every blink, a piece on the board. This is why Machiavelli's philosophy survives centuries. He understood that the ultimate power is invisible because it operates beneath awareness. It's not physical strength or intellectual superiority. It's behavioral intelligence, the ability to perceive before being perceived, to predict before being exposed. The body is the true battlefield of social dominance, and those who master its language rule without needing to be seen. We live in an age where everyone talks, but almost no one perceives. Every social space has become a stage, crowded with actors who've forgotten they were performing. Smiles are rehearsed, compliments are strategic, gestures are rehearsed, choreography meant to appear spontaneous. Authenticity has been replaced by performance, sincerity by simulation. We don't communicate anymore, we compete for control. And while the masses drown in noise, the real predators sit in silence, watching. They read what the rest of the world is too distracted to notice. Most people believe they're safe as long as their words are polite and their tone controlled. They have no idea their body is constantly betraying them. The nervous hand movement, the shifting weight, the microsecond of tension before answering a question, each of these signals reveals more truth than an entire paragraph of speech. The social predator doesn't need to interrogate you. Your nervous system does the talking. They study your rhythm, your breathing, your hesitation. They notice the fraction of a second when your eyes flicker with doubt, or when your shoulders fold slightly under invisible pressure. The tragedy is that most people think manipulation begins with words, when in reality, it begins with observation. The predator doesn't overpower. He tunes in. He detects emotional weakness through tiny muscular cues, the same way a hunter senses movement in the grass. You think you're just being polite. He sees compliance. You think you're being kind. He senses guilt. In a society addicted to expression, perception has become a lost art, and that's exactly why those who still perceive control, those who don't. The modern world rewards performance, but power belongs to those who can see through it. You try to be genuine, honest, and open, believing that authenticity protects you. You speak your truth, you show emotion, you offer transparency, thinking that honesty invites respect. But in the wrong hands, your openness becomes data. Every gesture of sincerity is decoded, every expression of discomfort is noted, every moment of hesitation becomes leverage. While you believe you're communicating, they're profiling you. You think you're connecting, they're calculating. Your eyes wander slightly when you feel cornered, your shoulders pull back when tension rises, your voice softens when you seek approval. To you, these are natural reactions. To them, they're instructions. The innocent enters the room wanting peace. The strategist enters wanting control. One believes in understanding, the other in advantage. The moment you try to prove your good intentions, you've already exposed where you can be manipulated. Machiavelli would say, "The pure heart is transparent in charis, and transparency is power only when guarded." But most people don't guard it. They confuse vulnerability with virtue, unaware that predators interpret kindness as access. They read empathy as softness, patience as weakness, and politeness as surrender. The innocent wants harmony, but harmony requires awareness. And awareness is the one skill they lack, so the game begins, and the innocent doesn't even realize they're playing. They explain, justify, overshare, revealing their emotional map in real time. The predator listens quietly, adjusting posture, mirroring gestures, drawing closer, testing boundaries. And by the time the innocent feels the discomfort, it's too late. They've already given away control. Not through consent, but through exposure. They never lost a battle. They simply didn't know one was happening. The day you begin to see these patterns, something irreversible happens. The world doesn't look the same anymore. What once felt like casual interaction now feels like a field of invisible power lines. You walk into a room and sense tension before a single word is spoken. The subtle shifts in posture, the overconfident lean, the calculated laugh. They all announce hierarchies before the conversation even begins. A smile no longer means warmth. It's a test. A handshake feels like a battle for dominance, disguised as politeness. You no longer see faces, you see masks. You no longer hear words, you hear strategy. This is the curse of awareness. Once your eyes adjust to the hidden language of the body, innocence becomes impossible. You can't go back to believing in surface meanings. Every interaction reveals subtext, the tilt of a head that signals superiority, the crossed arms of silent resistance, the subtle mimicry used to win your trust. You see it all, and it's exhausting. The pleasure of spontaneous connection fades, replaced by a constant decoding of motives. You realize that most people don't communicate. They maneuver. Their bodies speak the truth their mouths can't afford to admit. And so perception becomes both your weapon and your wound. You carry the burden of knowing too much. You notice manipulation in gestures meant to appear kind. You feel insincerity in smiles that once comforted you. Awareness isolates because it strips you of illusion. And illusion was the glue that made social life tolerable. The more you see, the less you can play along. You can no longer participate in the performance without betraying what you've learned. Machiavelli would call this the price of clarity. Once you've read the code of power, you can't unsee it. You stop reacting to the words and start responding to the intentions, and that shift quietly separates you from the crowd forever. There comes a point when you realize observation is no longer optional, it's survival. The more you perceive, the more you understand that staying too close to manipulation corrodes perception itself. Jung called it the necessary withdrawal, a moment when the conscious mind retreats from the chaos of collective unconsciousness to preserve its integrity. Machiavelli would have framed it differently, not as spiritual protection, but as strategy. When the environment is saturated with deception, retreat is not defeat, it's calculation. The general who knows when to step back lives to fight on his own terms. You withdraw not because you fear them, but because you can finally see them. You begin to recognize how every environment infected by subtle power games demands a piece of your awareness to sustain itself. Every conversation with hidden agendas pulls you into a fog where clarity dies by degrees. The predator's greatest victory is not domination, it's distraction. He keeps you reacting, defending, explaining. But the moment you step back, the spell breaks. You begin to see the entire board instead of just your square. Distance becomes the sharpest weapon. From the outside, silence looks like surrender, but it's actually reconnaissance. You observe patterns forming, alliances shifting, dominance displays unfolding. The longer you stay quiet, the more visible the hidden hierarchies become. You start mapping behaviors the way Machiavelli mapped the courts of Florence, studying loyalties, weaknesses, and desires. You stop seeking fairness and start recognizing structure. Withdrawal gives you what constant participation never could: perspective. You conserve energy instead of feeding emotional traps. You stop reacting to manipulation and begin predicting it. The absence others interpret as weakness becomes your invisibility cloak. In silence, you recover what the social battlefield had stolen: clarity, autonomy, and strategic patience. The retreat is not the end of the game. It's the moment you finally start playing it consciously. The awakening begins when you realize that the compliant body is the first to be conquered. The soft smile you offer to avoid conflict, the apologetic nod, the instinctive lean forward to appear agreeable, each one is a silent act of surrender. You've been trained to believe that kindness ensures safety, that politeness prevents aggression. But in the eyes of a manipulator, these gestures do not signal goodness, they signal accessibility. The body that constantly seeks approval announces that it can be bent, and those who understand power read that posture as invitation. The true shift happens the moment your body stops asking for permission to exist, when your shoulders no longer curl inward, when your spine holds its natural height, when your eyes meet rather than follow. That's when the dynamic reverses. Machiavelli would call this the rebirth of the sovereign self. Power begins not with domination, but with neutrality. A still posture communicates strength without threat. An unwavering gaze commands attention without aggression. Silence becomes an instrument, not an absence. It says, "I will not perform to be accepted." The submissive persona dies when you realize performance was your prison. You no longer laugh on command or nod to maintain peace. You stop filling silences with reassurance. The new language of respect is restraint. The less you explain, the more your presence speaks. Every controlled breath, every deliberate movement broadcasts self-mastery. The predator senses it instantly. There's nothing left to manipulate. You've closed the doors they used to enter. The naive part of you that believed goodness alone would protect you is gone. In its place stands something quieter, heavier, untouchable. Power no longer needs to prove itself. It simply is. Being constantly watched by social predators consumes psychic energy in ways words can't describe. It's not just emotional fatigue, it's spiritual erosion. You spend hours reading micro-gestures, decoding tone, measuring proximity, and suppressing your natural reactions. Every space becomes a quiet battlefield, where awareness feels like both armor and burden. You start anticipating manipulation before it happens, scanning every face for subtle power plays, keeping your body composed while your mind calculates survival. And yet, this hypervigilance eventually drains you. The more you defend yourself, the more of yourself you lose. But exhaustion has its own wisdom. When the mind finally tires of analyzing every move, when reaction becomes impossible, something else emerges. Presence. Real presence. The kind that doesn't need to fight or flee, because it no longer identifies with the game. The predator can only feed on reaction, and when you stop reacting, you become untouchable. Your stillness becomes disarming. not submissive but grounded. The manipulator feels it immediately. Your body no longer leaks insecurity, your energy no longer mirrors theirs. It's as if their hooks can't find a place to attach. In this quiet fatigue, something alchemical occurs. What began as tension transforms into clarity. Muscles once tense with defense now move with intention. Breathing deepens, vision sharpens. The need to prove or protect dissolves. You realize that awareness is not about control, it's about containment. Presence doesn't resist, it absorbs and neutralizes. The conscious body doesn't react to power, it reveals it. And when you stand in that awareness, calm and unshaken, the predator sees something they cannot manipulate. A mirror that reflects their own hunger back to them. That's when the game ends. Not through confrontation, but through silent sovereignty. Every strategist eventually reaches the phase of disappearance, the Machiavellian hermit stage. After the exhaustion of constant awareness, a deeper instinct emerges, withdrawal. Not as escape, but as refinement. Machiavelli himself knew this. Exiled from Florence, stripped of influence, he retreated to solitude, not in despair, but in study. Alone in his villa, he dissected human behavior, writing the anatomy of power itself. In silence, he saw patterns no court intrigue could reveal. And every student of power, whether they know it or not, repeats this pattern. There comes a time when you must step away from the theater to understand its architecture. In this quiet exile, solitude becomes a laboratory. Every past interaction replays in your mind, not with bitterness, but precision. You recall the handshake that disguised rivalry, the compliment that concealed a threat, the gesture that revealed fear. You begin to see that every social structure is an ecosystem of signals, and mastery requires distance to see the design. The more alone you become, the clearer the game appears. You study the body language of predators, but also your own, how your face betrayed appeasement, how your shoulders bent to avoid conflict, how your silence once meant submission instead of strength. Isolation becomes initiation. The Machiavellian hermit doesn't reject society. He studies it from the shadows. He practices invisibility until it becomes a form of power. He learns to see without being seen, to speak in ways that reveal nothing, to move through spaces like a ghost that observes but never leaks intention. This is the rebirth of sovereignty, an existence no longer dictated by reaction, but by design. When you master invisibility, you cease to be a target, because power no longer radiates outward, it condenses inward. The hermit's silence is not absence, it's containment. The strategist disappears so that when he returns, every word, every gesture, every glance will carry the weight of a weapon sharpened in solitude. When you return after understanding the body of predators, you're no longer the same. Something irreversible has shifted. Your movements are slower but sharper, your silence heavier but more precise. You've seen too much to play the old game, too aware to be caught in it again. What used to intimidate you now merely reveals itself. The same gestures that once controlled you now expose those who use them. You recognize the tremor of insecurity behind the smirk, the forced confidence behind the handshake, the subtle overreach of someone desperate for dominance. You no longer seek validation because you can sense the cost of it. Now your body speaks a different language. Your gaze no longer wanders, it anchors. Your stillness is deliberate, not hesitant. The predator feels it instantly. The atmosphere changes when you enter a room. You're not competing, yet everything about your presence commands attention. The silence around you expands, making others adjust their tone, their posture, their rhythm. You don't have to prove control anymore. Your neutrality is control. You've stopped performing, now you embody. This is what Machiavelli meant by invisible authority. True power doesn't need to announce itself because it emanates from self-mastery. You've withdrawn, observed, decoded, and now you move with precision. You no longer react to manipulation, you redirect it. You speak less but say more. You don't push, you pull through gravity alone. The calmness that once made you seem harmless has become magnetic. The composure of someone who understands every current in the room but chooses not to swim against it. You've become what Machiavelli would call the silent sovereign, untouchable not because you dominate others, but because you no longer need to. Presence has replaced performance. The game continues around you, but you are no longer a piece whilst you are the board. Machiavelli would remind us that true power has never belonged to those who speak the loudest, but to those who master what others cannot see. The visible world, words, expressions, promises, is only the surface of the game. Beneath it flows the silent current of influence, carried through eyes, gestures, pauses, and timing. The one who learns to read this current does not need to argue, convince, or threaten. They command the narrative simply by perceiving what others deny. When you understand how the unconscious moves, how fear stiffens the spine, how guilt lowers the shoulders, how arrogance hides behind stillness, you gain a kind of vision that cannot be faked. You stop reacting to the illusion and start shaping the reality beneath it. The body is the first battlefield and the final truth. Words may deceive, but the body always confesses. To read it is to pierce the veil of performance that society depends on to maintain its order. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. The powerful are not the strongest, but the most observant. They govern not by force, but by anticipation. They sense the shift before it happens, the betrayal before it's spoken, the weakness before it's revealed. This is the domain of invisible mastery, power without spectacle, control without conflict. And so learning this language is not about manipulation. It is about liberation. It's the art of no longer being played in a world built on subtle control. When you can read the invisible, you no longer live as prey to appearances. You move with quiet certainty, immune to deceit, unshaken by noise. Power ceases to be an act of domination. It becomes a state of awareness. To see the hidden game is to rise above it. To master the invisible is to rule without needing to rule. That is Machiavellian wisdom. Not cruelty, but clarity. You've seen the patterns now. You've recognized how words can hide intentions, how smiles can conceal calculation, and how silence can reveal more than speeches. The question is no longer whether manipulation exists, it is whether you will continue to walk through it blind. Every interaction from this moment on will look different. You'll notice the micro movements, the tone shifts, the subtle dominance games happening around you. And once you start seeing them, you can't go back. Awareness is the point of no return. It separates those who live unconsciously from those who read the room before the room reads them. So ask yourself, which of these body language traps have you already noticed in people near you? Who masks control behind warmth? Who retreats when challenged but returns with precision? The moment you identify them, you begin to reclaim your power. Observation becomes protection. Perception becomes armor. This isn't about paranoia, it's about lucidity. The body never lies, and those who learn to read it step outside the web of manipulation that holds the rest captive. Subscribe, because this is just the beginning. The next step is learning how to wield the same language consciously, how to use silence as a blade, posture as a shield, presence as invisible command. What Machiavelli wrote for princes now belongs to anyone with eyes sharp enough to see. You've already entered the threshold of awareness. The next videos will teach you how to master it. Welcome to the circle of those who see, those who do not just survive the social game, but rewrite its rules through the quiet force of psychological clarity.